This topic is probably the topic that I have put the most research into because I'm fascinated. When it comes to Hugh Hefner and the legendary Playboy magazine, it seems like a lot of people either love it and think it's a truly innovative creation, or they hate the absolute shit out of it. Same with Hefner. Some people think that he's a good, innovative, loving person, and then there's others who think he's a creepy old man with control issues who exploits women. But it is no denying that Hugh Hefner and Playboy were one of the most iconic popular culture topics of its time. What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. I am Shelby Nave, and today we are going to be discussing Playboy. I covered Barbie a couple weeks ago, and now I figured it was time to come and talk about Playboy. Kind of just been making this kind of content recently, and I've been enjoying doing it, so I figured why not keep doing it. I have probably watched 3 full-length documentaries, read countless articles and interviews, trying to get just a better understanding, an overall understanding of people's views towards Playboy and why it is such a controversial thing. In order to make a valuable opinion for you, I think that it is necessary that we go back to the very start of Hugh Hefner and Playboy, analyze everything from the very beginning. You'll find out why later. I try my best to always fact check myself. I especially did that this time around. If I say something today that you don't think is accurate, please correct me in the comments below. We're all here to learn. So we're starting at the very beginning with Hugh Hefner. He was born on April 9th, 1922 in Chicago to a religious family of Puritan descent. If you don't know what that means that his family was pretty highly religious. Puritans were people who were defined as a person who follows strict moral rules, who believes that pleasure is wrong. The irony. When Hugh Hefner was young, he was described actually as like a very shy child. He really didn't get much affection or any love like that from his parents. And I think that resulted in him being more shy than your average child. But it goes without saying that his family wasn't particularly involved in the cultural shifts that were happening during the Roaring 20s. But he was a very creative child, and he was talented from the start with writing and drawing. He was also known to be extremely fascinated by cinema and very influenced by romance movies and romance music of the time that actually kind of influenced him later on. Despite doing well in school, everything wasn't always rainbow and sunshine, because his very first crush, her name was Betty Conklin. She basically friend-zoned him before friend-zoning was even a thing. She didn't realize he liked her, she didn't like him back. It was a whole first love drama situation. I am telling you this for a reason. It is not useless information. His heartbreak and disappointment over Betty was actually the thing that caused him to make a little bit of a shift in himself. He started going by the name Hef rather than Hugh. He started wearing nicer clothes, putting a little more effort into his appearance, just kind of revamping his style.
Without Betty Conklin, there might never have been a Playboy.
He soon met a girl named Millie Williams, and she actually remained devoted to him during the time that he spent in the army during World War II. They hook up, they decide they want to get married. Meanwhile, Hef is going to school at the University of Illinois and actually earned a bachelor's degree in psychology. Right before he is about to marry Millie, she actually admits to him that she had cheated on him, but he ended up marrying her anyway. Great. Sounds like a horrible idea. He even admits that once they were married, the magic was gone pretty much immediately because he was so heartbroken over the affair. Oh my god, there's just so much irony, and we've barely begun. Fast forward, Hef has been working in Chicago for the magazine Esquire, but ended up quitting due to them refusing to give him a pay increase. Boy knows his worth, gotta give him that. His idea was that he wanted to start his own gentleman's magazine that actually showed nudity, which of course was very not normal for the time. This is where Playboy began. Well, the idea of Playboy at least. Realistically, Hef was broke. He did not have the money to just start up a magazine. And when he asked his father if he wanted to invest in the project, his father declined. Not exactly shocking. But with the help of a loan, some investors, and a check of $1,000 from his mom, who didn't necessarily believe in his idea but she believed in him, made it possible for him to publish the first issue of Playboy in December of 1953 for about $8,000. The very first issue of Playboy featured the one and only Marilyn Monroe. Not only was she unaware that she was going to be featured at all in Playboy, but Hef also decided to post her nude photos in the magazine without her consent. Okay. This is true. I honestly don't know how he was able to get away with that. These photos were taken before Marilyn was known in the industry yet, and she basically posed for this photographer out of desperation and was so embarrassed by them that she begged the photographer not to tell anybody that it was her. Marilyn was only paid about $50 for this photo shoot, but Hugh Hefner was able to get the rights of the photos for just about $500 and then of course published them to his magazine without permission. Nice! Using women for personal gain since '53. This very well could have ruined her career. I mean, yes, of course, history speaks for itself. It ended up working out for her. She thrived in the entertainment industry after this, but women were just starting to break out into the movie industry and stuff like that. She very well could have gotten blacklisted and just like shunned from Hollywood because of her nudes being in everybody's hands. Regardless, the first issue of Playboy was a complete success and they sold out of all like 70,000 copies. Funny enough too, it was recorded that after the launch of Playboy, Marilyn was never compensated for the photos of her nude body getting passed around to everybody. And she said, quote, "I never received a thank you from all of those who made millions off a nude Marilyn photograph. I even had to buy a copy of the magazine to see myself in it." He didn't even have the decency to send her a copy of the magazine she didn't know she was in. Like, come on, that's just a common courtesy. It's so hard for me to believe that there was a time that men were able to get away with that. And yes, I know for a fact that there's gonna be some people out there who are just like,
well, if she didn't want her photos to get out, then she shouldn't have posed nude.
which, yes, that would be the optimal way to make sure this doesn't happen to you, but she consented to have the photos taken of her. She did not consent to have them sent out and very publicly seen by everyone. That's a major difference. Regardless of her not owning the property that would be the photos, it's still her naked body. There would be no photo if it wasn't for her. Hugh Hefner actually never met Marilyn Monroe, but he was like a huge fan of her because she was like the ultimate blonde. And as we know, Hugh Hefner has a major obsession with beautiful blonde women. I don't feel like a lot of people know this, but Hugh Hefner actually bought the crypt next to Marilyn Monroe for $75,000. He said something in like an article about how he likes symbolism or like irony. It does kind of come full circle in a way that like his very first issue had Marilyn Monroe on it and now he's going to lay next to Marilyn Monroe forever. But that's also kind of a thing though, like she doesn't get to choose who lays next to her for eternity. Like she may not be his biggest fan. She might be, you know, upset from the grave over this. I think I would be. But apparently this isn't the only time that he's published photos unconsensually. Apparently Madonna, Jessica Alba, and Vanna White have all been in Playboy without their consent. Sketchy. Even more sketchy since Vanna White was his friend. Honestly, it really was not surprising that Playboy exploded the way that it did, because aside from the fact of it having literally no competition, there was no other magazine doing what they were doing, but it launched probably at the most ideal time because the sexual revolution was already sparking due to the creation of birth control and the release of the Kinsey reports. If you don't know what the Kinsey reports are, it's basically 2 books that are all about sexual behavior in men and women, which by the way, the Kinsey reports came out of Indiana University, which is my university. The reports came from there. The Kinsey reports were actually a pretty big deal and eye-opening to even Hef himself. Everybody's already talking about sex. Clearly it is the perfect time to publish a pretty highly sexualized men's magazine. And it worked. Was it controversial? Yes, but it worked.
In the sexual revolution, Kinsey was the researcher, the theorist.
And Hefner was the pamphleteer, and the guy that spread the good word. The sex was not the enemy.
As much as I don't enjoy giving credit to how Playboy was started, you do have to hand it to Hef for how much of an innovator he actually was. I'm not saying it's right, but he was kind of a master in his own craft. He created something that clearly had a huge demand and had never been done before, and it was definitely a driving force in the sexual revolution. And it wasn't just the nude photos that made the magazine popular. Yes, that was probably a huge part of it, but the magazine was also praised for its journalism, its articles, its interviews that they had featured in the magazines. Hef seemed to be known to hire writers who otherwise did not have a platform. Playboy was also one of the first magazines who utilized television in order to make more Playboy content like Playboy's Penthouse and Playboy After Dark, but was also noticed to be some of the most diverse shows on TV. Some of the first African Americans featured on TV was on Playboy's Penthouse, which was a pretty big deal because this was right in the middle of the civil rights movement as well. But it goes without saying, Hef, of course, experienced a lot of criticism after the launch of the magazine.
Did his magazine celebrate women or oppress them?
Playboy exploits sex like Sports Illustrated exploits sport.
Isn't that really what you're selling? Kind of a high-class, dirty book?
Sex always will be an important part of the book because sex is probably the single thing that men are most interested in.
Oh, with this, I think that you'll agree. It's a sniggering kind of sex. It's a lascivious kind of sex. It certainly isn't a healthy approach to sex. You suggest that it is.
I would not only suggest it, I would say rather strongly. We consider it a pretty healthy yet.
Here is a magazine supposedly devoted to sexual liberation, but it reduces women to the figure of a inconsequential animal.
I do not find the body of work admirable. I think it's part of the problem, not part of the solution.
They oppress us as women. They won't let us be. Hugh Hefner is my enemy.
I think that women over generations and centuries have indeed been oppressed. I think there's no question about it. I think there are still many areas in society in which they do not have equal job opportunity. One of the thrusts of the feminist movement is for better abortion laws. I think Playboy has done as much as any mass media in terms of trying to accomplish exactly that. I hope we're going to evolve into a society in which the broadest spectrum of opportunities exist for both men and women, less interested in women's rights than human rights. I think that it's...
Would you like to respond to?
I certainly would. The role that you have selected for women is degrading to women because you choose to see women as sex objects, not as full human beings. The day that you are willing to come out here with a cottontail attached to your rear end...
Damn! I mean, clearly he did not let that stop him. He was a very strong believer in what he was doing and was pretty committed to making it the best. He even got hooked on a drug for a while. I can't remember which drug it is off the top of my head right now. It was legal back in the day, but it basically would keep him up for several hours on end, so he was just kind of like working around the clock. He was a workaholic. Like, he essentially had a second apartment at his Playboy offices where he worked day and night, and then whenever he wasn't working, he would go and, have his pick of the litter with all the little bunnies he now has. But since he basically lived at his office, it made him kind of an absent father and husband. As Playboy grew, Hef's relationship with Millie obviously began to decline, and they divorced in 1959 after having 2 children together, which I have to give the credit where the credit is due. I respect the fact that Hugh Hefner continued to take care of all of his families throughout his years. Later on in the future, Millie apparently had trouble with her next husband and left him. Hugh actually came in and supported her. He bought her a house. So for the sake of being as objective in this video as possible, I am always going to give the credit where the credit is due. I respect the fact that he took care of his family and his prior partners in his older marriages, regardless if he was not actively with them. Okay, moving on. His divorce, however, did not slow down him or his endeavors for Playboy. And in 1960, Playboy expanded into another business of Playboy clubs, which was another entrepreneurial first. I feel like you know what I'm trying to say. First club opened in Chicago, and it was essentially like a nightclub / lounge where guests would have to have a bunny key in order to enter, and they would be served food and drinks by Playboy bunnies themselves. And then they also had comedians and musicians and other entertainers that would be performing there. These clubs were always described as super elegant and sophisticated and expensive and luxurious and that kind of vibe. The fantasy, essentially. That probably should have been the word I used from the start. It was supposed to kind of embody the Playboy fantasy. The Playboy clubs quickly expanded to a whole bunch of cities across the US before eventually also going international. Oh, but the clubs weren't all that they seemed, my friends. In 1963, journalist, feminist, and political activist Gloria Steinem went undercover at the Playboy Club in New York City and exposed everything that actually happened to the Playboy bunnies who worked there. She said that not only were the bunnies underpaid, but they had to work really long hours and were continuously felt up and verbally harassed by the people who attended the clubs. Hef's brother Keith was actually the person responsible for bunny training, and there were a lot of really strict rules that these girls had to abide by, and even if something was slightly out of place, including your body size, you would be deducted some of your pay or let go. Mainly because Keith treated the bunnies not only like they were in the service business, but also show business. You couldn't have a run in your stockings, your heels couldn't be worn down, your nails had to be perfect, your bunny ears had to be straight, and you always had to get checked by the bunny mother before heading down to your shift. I understand restaurants wanting to keep a certain atmosphere at their restaurants or their clubs or whatever it is, and that's why they have strict dress code. However, just on top of everything else that's happened, and the more that I'm going to tell you, I feel like it's just a little much. The craziest part of all of it, though, is that the Playboy bunnies, who were like, they were waitresses. Like, that's what their job was, to like be a waitress and to be pretty. However, it was mandatory that all of them undergo a physical exam, and by physical exam, I mean a gynecologist appointment, to work there. Now listen, I've never been a waitress before, but I'm fairly certain that you don't need to have a doctor look at your lady business in order to be a waitress. What Gloria had discovered, though, was that certain customers who obtained a very special bunny key would get whatever they wanted. That's f***ing gross. Let me ask you, what do you think men at a Playboy club came for? Suddenly it's all making sense why Playboy would want all their waitresses, you know, clean down there. This is essentially a prostitution ring, and was the final straw for Gloria. She decided to quit after that opportunity was presented to her. Don't blame her for that one. So basically, Gloria wrote this article exposing everything that happened with her experience at the Playboy Club, and of course it exploded. But it did actually make Hef kind of realize, oh, maybe we shouldn't make our girls undergo physical exams and deduct their pay for stupid reasons. Yeah, let's change that. Which is great and all, but it would have been more great if he didn't have to change anything from the beginning and only changed it because he got found out. I will say though, not everyone seemed to have the same experience that Gloria did. There was some other interviews that I watched of women who said they made great money off of their tips. They didn't feel like they were overly harassed or anything like that, and they actually enjoyed the job. Some of them even said that, like, being a Playboy bunny who worked at one of these clubs, they were kind of looked at like a celebrity. But nonetheless, Gloria's work was huge for the feminist / women's rights area. And also, let me just say, Gloria was spilling the tea before all you bitches. She basically beat men at their own game, and that is a huge win for women. But despite Gloria's efforts, that did not really affect Playboy that much, or Hef, and he soon became, quote, the persona of Playboy, the urban sophisticate in a silk smoking jacket with a pipe in hand. He adopted a wide range of pursuits and socialized with the famous and wealthy, in always the company of young, beautiful men. Women, whoa. Always in the company of young, beautiful women. But let's move on. I want to talk about the Playboy Mansion a little bit. The most known Playboy Mansion is the one that's located in Los Angeles. However, the first Playboy Mansion actually was in Chicago, along with the majority of Playboy headquarters. Like, pretty much all of Playboy originated in Chicago. The first mansion was built in 1899 and was acquired by Hef in 1959. And obviously, the Playboy Mansions were known for their crazy, sophisticated fantasy parties that they had. I mean, honestly, everything that I read about the parties and like the videos and stuff that I saw of parties happening at Playboy Mansions, it really just kind of reminded me of The Great Gatsby, where it's just like everybody who's anybody goes.
Caravansary of billionaire Playboy publishers and their blonde nurses.
The LA Mansion especially was known to be visited by high-profile celebrities and like public figures. However, it was not all glitz and glam. More on that later. Another notable romance that Hugh Hefner had was with Barbie Benton. She was actually the person who discovered the LA Mansion and convinced Hef to buy it. When Hef and Barbie met, he was 42 and she was 18. I don't want to get judgy about age differences, and I know that it's just going to get progressively worse as we go through this story, but a 42-year-old and an 18-year-old are just genuinely in two very different stages of life, in my opinion. But anyway, Barbie was hired for, I think, Playboy's penthouse, and she was just supposed to be atmosphere for the show, but Hef was attracted to her from the start, and she in the beginning was not into it. In some interview, she mentioned like a memory of when she was talking to Hef, and she said, "I've never dated anyone over 24, and he said, "Me too." He's a 42-year-old man. He's never dated anyone over 24. That's bonkers. However, the two of them did actually stay in a relationship for a very long time. I think that this is one of the most notable relationships just because I think Barbie actually kept Hef young, if you will. It's said that when he was with her, they did a lot of traveling. They just did a lot more things that weren't just work. And I know, at least for Hef's kids specifically, I think that's what they liked about Barbie, was just that it kind of got their dad out of the just constant work circle, and he actually like did things. and lived life. Eventually, Hef asked her to marry her, and she said no. Hef was not exactly known for monogamous relationships, and I think that she just believed that if he would cheat on her when she was his girlfriend, he would cheat on her when she was his wife. Apparently, the final straw for her was when he actually slept with someone that she knew really well, and that just severed it completely. Even when they were together, Hef described their relationship as she was like the primary romance, but he still had other romances. Like, he said straightforward it was never a monogamous relationship, and she knew that. I don't think she necessarily liked that, but she probably was aware, and that's why she didn't necessarily want to get married to him. But also, she mentioned that Hef started pulling kind of a double standard. Hef would be dating her, but also dating other people. However, if she wanted to date other people, that wasn't as okay. Double standards are stupid! He slept with someone that she knew very well. She decided to bail, and I think that actually really hurt him for a bit. But that wasn't the only woman in his life who was hurting. Hef decided to move from the Chicago mansion to the LA mansion in 1975 after the suicide of his assistant, Bobbie Arnstein. Bobbie started working for Hef right out of high school, and I think that initially that it was kind of a dating relationship, but then they eventually just grew to have a really good friendship. But she was like his executive secretary, so she was obviously very involved in not only his work life, but probably some of his personal life too, especially since his work and private life are so like intertwined, you know? However, Bobbie was troubled, and after the loss of her fiance, she apparently just kind of started living more of a freewheeling lifestyle and was dating a lot of younger men, which, just quick side note here, myself, as a 24-year-old woman, I know that, at least me personally, I would not deal well with that kind of lifestyle. So I can see, at least if she's anything like me, why this would contribute to her just being mentally up. I think mostly just because I can't imagine that my self-worth would not be damaged, and I know that I would probably really struggle with that if I was in her shoes, so I really feel for her on that one. Not only did she find herself comparing her to the other women in her work atmosphere, the other playmates, which she was not that at all. You know, she wasn't that type of girl. She was never in like the playmate scene of the business. She was strictly like corporate, but that also was hard for her because she was having a hard time kind of moving up the ranks against all of the other men who worked for Playboy. Inequality in the workplace. Eventually, Bobbie started dating a drug dealer and got caught up in the law when she was busted in front of the Chicago mansion, supposedly conspiring to move cocaine from Florida to Chicago. Not only was this bad for her, this was bad for Playboy. I mean, now this story is getting plastered all over the newspapers, and since she works for Playboy, Playboy is also getting plastered all over the newspapers. People trying to make some sort of association with the crime and Playboy. Bobbie was sentenced to 15 years in prison, 5 years longer than all of the men who were also a part of the operation. Not only was this just sexism, but the FBI were trying to use Bobbie as a mole to take down Playboy that they've basically been trying to do since the beginning of the magazine. An attorney even told her that there was a contract for her murder, trying to scare her into his protection so that he could use her to get more information.
My lawyer suggests that I not give any statements. It's not my personal feeling. Okay, thank you. Well, sorry.
She didn't cooperate with the police and remained loyal to Hef the entire time. However, that didn't stop her and the rest of the people in the Playboy Mansion from being incredibly paranoid that they were being set up. I think Bobbie felt especially guilty because all of the attention surrounding the bust actually caused an old scandal of a Playboy bunny overdosing on Quaaludes back to the surface, which obviously was not good for Playboy since the FBI is trying to build up a case against them. And this was the environment that caused Bobbie to kill herself, pretty much right after she got a raise and a promotion. Hef actually seemed to be pretty devastated by Bobbie's death for a while just because, like, he cared about her. She was very loyal to him.
After her death, I flew to Chicago and made a public statement.
The suicide of Bobbie Arnstein makes any further silence impossible. But because of her association with Playboy and with me, she became the central focus in a cocaine conspiracy case in which it appears she was only peripherally involved.
I think he had a lot of sadness, especially just because he thought that her affiliation with him and with Playboy ultimately is what caused this conspiracy for her to spiral into, and it kind of got a little out of control. From what I read and what I saw, it did kind of seem like the authorities were trying to pin this crime on Playboy somehow, and it just wasn't there.
The FBI, that the powers were trying to pin something on my brother that just wasn't so. It wasn't so at all. They didn't like the magazine because they thought it was dirty, and the ruthlessness was just, unimaginable.
And they were using Bobbie to do that, which really sucks, because Bobbie may have just felt like she made a stupid mistake and now she literally had no direction to turn. She had nowhere to go. And that's really shitty if that's how that actually worked out. And unfortunately, that wasn't the only death that involved Hef and Playboy. Dorothy Stratton from Vancouver, Canada was Playmate of the Month in 1979 and Playmate of the Year in 1980, and had a pretty good career going for her as an actress and model. Interestingly enough, when Dorothy moved to LA from Canada, she wasn't comfortable with all of the casual sex and nudity and everything going on, and some of the really known Playmates actually ended up taking her under their wing and just kind of protecting her from some of Hef's friends that the girls kind of thought were predators, which, first of all, go girls, keep looking after each other. But this actually was a very valid concern, the safety of the Playmates, because way in the future there's going to be a case of Bill Cosby allegedly raping someone at the Playboy Mansion. And I'm sorry, it's just really hard for me to believe that Hef wouldn't know a thing about it, or that the other Playmates wouldn't be hush-hush about it, mainly out of fear. I'm gonna read you a quick quote. "If his girls wouldn't speak up when they were Playmates, some of the most idolized women in the world, then it's safe to think that neither would budding actresses or hopefuls that were planning on making a career. That means that the Harvey Weinsteins of the world could do whatever they wanted without fear of being found out or caught. Such individuals thought themselves untouchable for a long time, since no one would dare say a word against them in the male-dominated industry." Clearly, the mansion may not have been the safest environment for the Playmates. They probably saw a lot of shit that they weren't allowed to talk about, mainly just because, from what I would assume, the men attending these parties at the mansion probably had the power to completely squash their careers. And if you're a young actress or a young hopeful to become famous, the last thing that you want is your career to be squashed. So you probably say whatever, do whatever, keep quiet when you need to, and that's how these men don't get found out. But yeah, Hef himself apparently has even been accused of forcing himself onto Dorothy. But some people believe that Dorothy ended up marrying a man named Paul Snyder because of the fact that she felt unsafe, so she married him out of protection, despite the fact that many people did not like him. When she apparently told Hef that she was going to marry Paul Snyder, Hef encouraged her to kind of cut ties with him because he thought he was a hustler or a pimp. That might be the pot calling the kettle black, but okay. It kind of seemed like everybody loved Dorothy. A bunch of people said just how special of a human she was, and how weird it was that she was with Paul Snyder, who was such a lowlife, scum, sleazy, just bottom of the barrel of a person. Hef thought that she felt obligated to marry him because they had apparently been together for a while. Snyder was pressuring her to marry him, and then once they were married and she was getting more and more famous, it just got kind of even more toxic. He basically acted as her manager. I don't know if he was her manager officially, but he was just kind of always up in her business and had harsh criticism and just made life probably not easy for her, but if she even really thought about leaving, he threatened that he would make her life hell. But soon she got an acting gig that was shooting in New York, and it was a closed set, so her husband could not come with her, which is a good thing because while she was there, she started getting really close with the director, Peter Bogdanovich. Things were, of course, not going well for Dorothy and Snyder, especially after the fact that he found out that she had been living with Bogdanovich and was intending to divorce him. Snyder hoped that when she was done shooting in New York and came back to LA that maybe they would be able to reconcile their relationship, but Dorothy admitted to him that no, she had fallen in love with Peter and that she wanted to finalize their divorce. And she very well at this point could have just handed the case off to her lawyers and have them deal with everything, but she wanted to deal with it personally because she wanted to remain friends with Snyder. Very long, sad story short, Snyder shot Dorothy in the face before turning the gun on himself and killing himself. Word got back to Hef. Hef called Bogdanovich, who was, of course, absolutely devastated by Dorothy's death. Understandably so. Hi everyone. So I know you're probably curious of why I'm popping in here, but I didn't realize when I was writing this video that it was going to end up being so long. And because of the fact that I strongly believe that people are afraid of clicking on videos that are longer than 30 minutes, I'm deciding to cut this video in half. So this is obviously the first portion of the Playboy story. There's so much more that we have yet to get into, and that is going to be the follow-up video after this one. So if you want to see how Peter Bogdanovich completely blamed Dorothy's death on Hugh Hefner and just the effects of Playboy after this incident, definitely stay tuned for the next video. But thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it through this entire video. I usually don't go this long. If you like this video, definitely give me a thumbs up down below and leave me a comment on what you have found to be most shocking thus far. Don't forget to give me a like and subscribe. It really does help me out and my channel. I'll see you when I post part 2 of this video.